Everybody, that we now face a difficult autumn in the Eurozone. We have a difficult series of discussions over Greece, its future in the Eurozone, its bailout, and then an even more difficult discussion probably about deeper efforts to resolve the sovereign debt crisis and support the bond yields of countries like Spain and Italy. So what should those countries that are not in the epicenter of the Eurozone debt crisis, what should they or what can they do as we await the outcome of the next set of interminable discussions, which will no doubt go very late at night and into the early morning in Brussels at various summits? Well, welcome to this session, The Crisis and Beyond. I'm Stephen Castle. I write for the International Herald Tribune and for the New York Times. And with me here this afternoon, I have a distinguished panel of guests who are going to reflect on that question. We have the view here from the very top of the World Trade Organization. We have representative of one of the BRICS, the fast-growing economies, from Brazil. We have the academic perspective from an economist. We also have a representative of one of the world's largest multinational companies. And I hope that during the next hour or so they're going to reflect on these issues and perhaps come up with one or two answers to some of the key questions which I think present themselves. For example, what can a multilateral organization like the World Trade Organization do in this climate, particularly now the Doha round has appeared to fail? What difference will Russia's accession to the WTO make? Or should we be worried, increasingly worried, about the threat of protectionism, about the risk of trade wars? Then, for those rapidly growing economies, the BRICS, they appear to start with, I think, to have escaped the worst effects of the Eurozone crisis, but now there's some evidence of slowing. So what is the impact of the Eurozone crisis, particularly on the BRICS? How can they cope with the fallout? How can they cope with the reduced investment, reduced investment in this very jittery, risk-averse climate, the reduced commodity prices, deleveraging by European banks? Can they actually build themselves into this alternative motor of growth? And is there really a policy prescription for these economies? Can they take steps that will effectively stimulate the global economy without creating risks to their own future, perhaps setting in place a chain of events which could lead to overheating in the future? What I'm going to do is just introduce very, very briefly the speakers today. I will just say a couple of sentences about each. I'm afraid I will not do justice to their many accomplishments, but just in view of the time, we're going to be brief. They will speak for something between 5 and 10 minutes, and then we'll return for discussion and questions which hopefully you will shape from the floor. We're going to start with Alejandro Jara, who's Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. He spent there more than a decade there, since he was appointed as Chile's representative in 2000. He's played a key role in negotiations on the Doha round, as well as other key negotiations, and is the ideal man to tell us where the WTO goes from here.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm delighted to be here. It's my first time in Bled, beautiful place, and I'm glad that we brought some sun. I was sitting here at the previous panel, and I was looking at the theme of today's forum, Europe and the reshaped global order. And as the moderator of the previous session said, it's not reshaped, really, it's reshaping, because it's in the process, it's in the making. Then I thought about order. What I see is a global disorder, not order. Out of this chaos, we will have some order, but it will take, I think, some years to come. I'd say this to illustrate something. We have an economic crisis, a financial crisis. Many things are regulated nationally, but global markets are global. We have problems in achieving better cooperation in nuclear field and climate change. We have the Eurozone crisis, we have food prices, we have a crisis with the stocks of fisheries, etc. All this leads to me to say we have a huge crisis, which is a political crisis, it's a crisis of governance. Some time, a few months ago, I heard the president of the Central Bank of Peru in a private meeting saying, I have no doubt, he said, that the politicians always get it right. They always take the right decisions. The problem, he said, is that the markets don't wait for them. We have a dysfunction today between the capacity of states or international agencies or regional agencies to act in a timely way to problems and issues and challenges and crises, and the behavior of the markets and other. So it is, and this brings along a problem of credibility, of trust. There's an increasing lack of trust and credibility in the capacity, be it governments, be it international agencies, regional agencies, to tackle these issues in a timely way. Take our trade negotiations launched in 2001. They have been stalled since 2008. We have been unable to enter the final phase of the negotiations. What is the problem? We have a few members, not more than 5, perhaps even less. What is the issue? Things have changed. China is there. China was not there 10 years ago, and in a big way. So this upset the politics, the domestic politics of some of the key members. So it makes it more difficult for them to move, to take the step and to lead the way into the concluding phase of the negotiations, and to start doing agricultural reform and to start dealing with fishery subsidies and to start opening markets in the face of what I see an increasing risk of protectionism. Not that more measures are being applied, but the stock keeps increasing. And today we have trade restrictive measures which more or less amount to the whole of trade of Africa, or the trade of Brazil and India added together. It's about 3% of world trade. And that is increasing, and this is bad, and the most affected will always be the developing countries, and it will make it more difficult for other countries, wealthier countries, to keep jobs, to regain momentum in the face of this crisis.
Rodriguez Costa, representative from the BRICS, so we have high hopes here. Mr. Costa is International Relations Director at Invest Sao Paulo, which is the body set up to attract investment into Brazil's largest city. Before taking up that position, he had a varied business career in Brazil in a range of sectors, from IT to power generation, so again has a great perspective on what exactly is going on in Brazil and why the economy is slowing if it is.
I am to control it. Thank you very much, distinguished guests. It's a great honor for me to be here leading Invest São Paulo, which is the state of São Paulo agency to support foreign direct investment into the largest and the leading state of Brazil, with a GDP of $792 billion US dollars and 42 million inhabitants. So it's significant numbers, which make me think about the time when I graduated from school, and I had one professor of mine saying, Sergio, the world has been in crisis since ever. And I took that quote in my life, and I thought, what does crisis has all, what is the relation of crisis with everything that we face? The problem that I see, and I was also meditating on the theme for the Blade Strategic Forum, which is Europe in the reshaped global order. What is reshaped means that the original form is not there anymore. It requires different thinking. It requires from you different approaches to make sure that you will be able to tackle the problems that now seem to arise in front of you from a different perspective. And I'm proud to be a Brazilian because we are optimists, And we learned the hard way how to build a solid banking system. We learned the hard way how to be more innovative. We learned the hard way how to provide companies with a better business environment every day. And long story short, it shows me that I know that crises also bring uncertainty, and I recall a book by Robert Quinn in which he says that there are times in our lives in which we need to face deep change. If we do not promote deep change, we will certainly face slow death. I think that Europe is currently facing this kind of difficulty that Brazil faced some time ago, in which it required from the Brazilian government a different perspective and different approach to make a decision to foster the development of the country based on the inclusion of more people from the lowest classes to migrate 40 million people in 10 years to the middle class so that they would be able to consume more added value products, and therefore they would have more income to make sure that wealth would be better distributed in the country. While the country was also conducting major reforms in the tax system, in the fiscal management of things, to make sure that both businesses and government would understand that both had a better environment to grow. Another thing that I would like to bring here, just as a comment, is that because of this environment, which became very important in the eyes of the world, with a population of roughly 200 million inhabitants, Brazil has the chance to provide other companies with a very intense domestic market, extremely relevant in Latin America. And long story short, and under my perspective, this also provided me with a great opportunity to support foreign companies to set their operations in São Paulo. Invest São Paulo was created 2 years ago, and so far we have brought $7.92 billion in new investment to the state, generating 24,700 direct jobs. But my concern was that we always wanted qualified jobs and qualified businesses, which would comply with our environmental policies, which would comply with our strategy to promote development to the lagging regions of the state of São Paulo, because I have to promote even development within the state, and therefore contribute to the development of Brazil as a whole. My point here is that I kindly ask everyone in Europe to consider different answers or different perspectives from different places of the world so that you will start thinking outside the box. I know it's kind of a cliche, but it takes effort and it takes heart to start really thinking outside the box and walking the talk. I think we have a huge opportunity here, and this is my message to everyone in Europe. Take heart. The answers are not there yet. There is no recipe on a book or on a shelf that you can pull and make sure that you will follow those steps. But there are insights that can be taken from other countries and other regions in the world to show Europe a way of sorting it out through the crisis. I don't say that the crisis will be over. I'm just saying that it may be less painful if we open our hearts to different approaches that can be applicable to the reality of every nation which constitutes the European Union. Thank you very much.
Peter Holmes is Director of the Centre for the Analysis of Regional Integration at Sussex University in England. He's an economist, specialist in international integration. He's written extensively on trade and competition policy, and I think has completed studies for a number of bodies, including the European Commission and the British government, amongst others. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honour to be here. It's a lovely place, and I'm very grateful to particularly to my friend Andre, who's sitting over there, Andre Virchon, who invited me. I'd like to, I have to confess that I'm going to be a bit Keynesian here, so I'm going to try and say some things that are a bit different from the tenor of the previous discussion. But if I could go back first of all to a little bit of history. short term, then long term. Autumn 2008, November 2008, I was at a meeting which a number of Chinese government advisors were in the British Department of Business, and people were saying to them, aren't you afraid of a return to protectionism? And the Chinese all said, no, no, surely we've all learned the lessons of the 1930s, haven't we? And the sense I had then was that was uncertain. A few months later, it looked as if we had. It's so easy to forget what happened in the autumn of 2008 and the spring of 2009. Chinese imports fell by 20% in the month of November 2008. The total fall in world trade was something like 49, well, it's for certain countries, up to 40 or 50% between the peak of the summer of 2008 and spring 2009. We did learn the lesson that there mustn't be massive protectionism. And as Alejandro has said, the WTO members have managed to avoid doing what they did in the 1930s, putting huge amounts of protectionism on. They still haven't avoided any of it, but the situation in terms of protectionism is probably better than many people feared then. But whereas in 2008, 2009, people also learned the other lesson of the 1930s, namely that when the private sector is collapsing and spending less and investing less, it doesn't make sense for the government to do the same. From 2010 onwards, we've been doing just that. There's we've been taught, in the last session we were talking about austerity. I would argue that the euro crisis has nothing to do with government spending. You look at the figures for the period 2000 to 2007, and you'll find that the countries that got into trouble were not the ones with any kind of excessive government borrowing. It was the country with current account deficits. That's the issue. We have Germany with a gigantic surplus, which I believe, and I perhaps can be corrected, a current account surplus which is now comparable to China. And the rest of the Eurozone has got a deficit. The Eurozone as a whole is roughly in balance. But whereas China drew the correct lessons from the 1930s about what not to do and what to do, China is doing adjustment and financing. That's to say, the Chinese, whether it's enough, we shall see. The Chinese are increasing domestic spending to try and turn their economy towards domestic demand rather than foreign demand, and they're continuing to lend money to their customers, the United States. Now, this is probably not a very good deal financially for China, but it's extraordinarily, if you like, supportive of the stability of the world system. Within the European economy, the countries in trade deficit have been allowed to borrow on a very short-term basis through some of the rather curious mechanisms of the Euro system. But suddenly, the loans have been turned off. And the countries of the Eurozone, which are in deficit, have been told, right, you've got a very short amount of time to rebalance your budgetary and, what's really necessary, the trade accounts. Now, being an old-fashioned Keynesian, I'm saying this is not going to work. And what's more, I'm going to say that it's going to be, I say it's counterproductive. When you cut government spending and you reduce economic activity, you run the risk of actually making the debt crisis worse. The ratio of debt to national income can go up, not down. The budget crisis, in my opinion, I'm deliberately trying to be provocative here, a few minutes only, the deficit, government deficits are caused by the crisis. They're not the result of the crisis. You can't cure the crisis by something which is by trying to reverse a result of the crisis. And if we take this further, what's going to happen? A very interesting paper by the Bruegel think tank, looking at the trade imbalances within Europe, is pointing out that the German surplus is continuing, and the intra-European trade imbalances are beginning to eliminate. What that means is that the Eurozone is being pushed into a position where the countries that are in deficit, the trade deficit countries, are seeking to cure their trade imbalances, their current account imbalances, by their external trade with the rest of the world. Now, I'd be very interested to know Mr. Harrow's opinion on this, but it seems to me that the way the Eurozone is trying to correct its problems is not only impossible from an internal financial point of view, it's going to cause enormous additional crises for the rest of the world. So that if we see this trajectory from 2008 going down, we may not have the back up again in the spring of 2009 next time round. The point is that if the German surplus is of the same order of magnitude as the Chinese surplus, and the Germans are insisting that their surplus is the result of virtue, and they're not obliged to lend anybody any money to buy from them, and the rest of the Eurozone is forced to try and rebalance its accounts with the rest of the world, we run the possibility that either the Eurozone, the southern Eurozone, the deficit Eurozone, is trying to sell an amount comparable to the German overall trade surplus to the rest of the world, so that the Eurozone as a whole would be trying to run a trade surplus the size of China, which with international trade faltering seems to be impossible. Let's look at what happened to Europe's Chinese exports to Europe. They fell, I think it's 11% in the month of July. We're going down this 2008 path again. So world trade is declining. Europe is not going to be able to export its way out of the crisis. And if it tries the other means, that 11% fall in China's exports to Europe is going to be magnified. So Europe, I mean, I stand to be corrected here, but I can't see how Europe can export its way out of the crisis. And if it tries to apply the austerity route to balance its external books, it's going to do to the rest of the world what it did in 1931, and what it didn't do, but nearly did, or the north of Europe did, in 2008, 2009. So I would say be very afraid, and if someone can come up with the right solution for the rest of the world, well, I very much hope to hear it. Thank you.
Very much. Mark Ramsey, our final speaker, is Vice President for Business Analytics and Optimization at IBM's Global Business Services. He joined IBM in 1995, is based in the Czech Republic, but focuses on his expertise on 8 growth markets, which sound like most of the world here: Southeast Asia, India and South Asia, Greater China, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. You're busy, but please give us your perspective.
Spend a lot of time on airplanes, so thank you. First of all, I'm honored to be here and represent IBM, and IBM is also very proud to be a sponsor of this year's BLED Strategic Forum. I wanted to take just a moment. Last year, IBM celebrated our 100th birthday, and through the 100 years, IBM's real focus has been to continue to innovate. And many of you, when you think of IBM, you may still think of hardware like computer systems and things like that, which we continue to be a world leader in developing that technology. However, we've also transformed our business to focus a lot more on overall solutions. Hopefully many of you have seen the Smarter Planet program from IBM, which is really around helping all organizations, including governments, move to that next step. So really transform and innovate and change. And one of the things we recognize is that the crisis that occurred around the world in 2008, 2009, we saw basically 2 responses. We saw some organizations and governments that tried to make very incremental changes to wait for the crisis to be over and things to get back to normal. And then we also saw organizations that use the crisis as a catalyst to completely transform the way they're operating. In fact, this morning's program, we heard from an automobile parts manufacturer here in Slovenia, actually, that when the crisis hit, their business dropped 60%, almost overnight. And they manufactured automobile turn signals and things like that. What they did, which puts them in that second category, is they completely transformed their business. They moved into the whole effort around illumination. They happen to be focused on LED. And they have now not only returned to the levels that they were in 2008 and 2009, but they have now actually grown by another 40%. And I think sometimes, and we heard this from the panel earlier, sometimes there's so much focus and doom and gloom around the crisis that people forget that there is a path out of this. It really requires transformation and change. We can't get there by just doing small little incremental updates. Now, in your welcome packets, you will have received this small little booklet. Now, I don't have the big stack of books like Secretary General Guerra, but I have this little booklet from the standpoint of Let's Be Green. So we didn't print the entire report, but this is a very recent study that IBM conducted with over 1,600 leaders. So that is chief executive officers of private industry, as well as leaders of countries, ministers, to really understand what they are doing, what is working, what isn't working, kind of what keeps them up at night for the next 3 to 5 years. Let me boil that down to 3 key points. One is around empowering employees, and this is to really help employees be a lot more collaborative, as well as the moral and ethics piece came up very strong. Now, what we've done in the study, and in the back of this little pamphlet, you'll find a link that you can download the entire survey and see how you match to the other organizations. But what we found is organizations that did empower employees and did execute on those things were the leaders versus the laggards in the transformation. The second area was around engaging customers and constituents. And I think we heard a lot about this in the earlier panel around the fear around social media. Social media for governments is really a direct and immediate interaction with their constituents. So it's a matter of how to harness the power that is then that constant flow of information and really use that as a way to change policy and act a lot faster. That's one of the things around this area as well is our constituents and the customers of private organizations, they do not have a tolerance for things taking too long. So that time frame for action is significantly reduced across all industries. And then finally is the area of amplifying innovation. And this was an interesting one because, again, it is around not only innovating our government or innovating a company, but it is doing so with a partnership. So it's growing the ecosystem. No longer can governments or can private industry view themselves as autonomous. And so, again, this morning we had a discussion from one of the other sponsors, BMW, talking about their introduction of electric vehicles. And what they are doing, which I think is, again, innovating with partnership, is as part of releasing the electric vehicle, they also are releasing an agreement with a renewable energy source to power the electric vehicle. So they are completely changing the way that they're viewing about the production of an automobile. So those are just 3 highlights around the study, and I'd look forward to answering any of your other questions around this. Or, like I said, you can download the study as well as an applet and review all of the studies and actually position your government and your organization in that matrix.
Thank you very much for that. Several very good and interesting themes here. I'd like to pick up immediately on the issue of protectionism, if we can. Peter Holmes says this is a lesson that was learned. But Alejandro, you mentioned this as a real worry in your introduction. Is this a real problem? If you could just address the issue of whether multilateral organizations like the WTO really are, to use the horrible phrase of the moment, fit for purpose. I mean, Pascal Lamy warned of a wasted year, 2012. Some would say the last decade, really, in terms of trade negotiations, hasn't been very fruitful. So are you up to the job as not you personally, obviously you are, but as an organization, and is protectionism been slayed?
Well, I would say that since the beginning of the crisis, we've seen many restrictive trade measures. I'm not going to call them necessarily protectionist. Some of them are actually legal measures foreseen in the agreements of the WTO. Thus, they're under control, and they can only be applied in some circumstances, be it an anti-dumping duty, countervailing duty, a safeguard, etc. So, and there are other measures. But the problem is that, contrary to all the pledges that many countries have made, for example, in the G20 and in other fora, there's been no rollback of these measures, so they keep accumulating. So it's the effect of this stock of measures which is having an increasing impact in the world economy. Now, many of these measures have been challenged or are being challenged in the WTO by big, small countries, etc. It doesn't matter. And to the extent they are challenged, and the countries have to change the measures or derogate them. The system is working as a dispute settlement forum, and the system is working as a forum where you have transparency and accountability for the measures that countries apply. So, in other words, the system is working. There's a lot of cooperation going on, and these are legal obligations that are more or less widely respected in the WTO. The problem is that we are dealing with an agenda of long ago, but it's still a relevant agenda about agriculture subsidization, for example, which must be tackled at some point in time, opening more markets for industrial products than others, and dealing with other problems, issues which are in the agenda of the Doha round. Now, we have to find the right political balance to bring that to a conclusion and go into new areas in which we need more and better international cooperation, for example, on investment, for example, on competition policy and other issues. So, and if you look at the world as it is today, increasingly the production is organized along global supply chains. Therefore, many parts and pieces come from different parts of the world, assembled in one country. For example, China is shipped worldwide. So it makes less and less sense to apply restrictive measures, because you may be actually, by applying a measure against a particular product, maybe applying a product which has a part of piece or some intellectual property which is yours. We no longer say this product comes from such a country. We say it's made in the world. Now, there is a problem because some countries are not part of these global supply chains. For example, largely Africa and largely Latin America, perhaps with the exceptions of Mexico and Costa Rica and Embraer in Brazil and others. But for the most part, they are in Latin America, absent from these global supply chains. Why is a good question. I don't have an answer for that. But it's of concern that even though these economies have opened and better integrated into the world, they're not really part of these global supply chains as they are so prevalent in Asia, in Europe, and in the United States.
Could I move on to the other part of Peter's argument here, which essentially, if I'm paraphrasing a little bit, was that Europe is indulging in something of a suicide mission with its austerity drive. If you ever get an invitation to the finance ministry in Berlin, I suspect they will say to you, your prescription for a debt crisis is to borrow more money and spend it. So maybe you could react to that. And also, if I could ask Sergio afterwards, how does it look from Brazil when you see this austerity, deficit reduction policy coming out of Europe?
Could I just quickly follow on from what Alejandro just said? I completely agree with what he's saying, and I want to say that if you read the economists who I've been sort of drawing on from what I was saying, Paul Krugman and Martin Wolf, they are both great supporters of free trade. So I don't think one should counterpose the idea of liberalisation and free trade as an alternative to a stimulus policy. I actually believe that depression is just when you can't get the trade liberalisation. One of the reasons why the WTO round is necessary is to help us with the crisis. But in a situation where people are very afraid of losing their jobs, people are very conscious of the gross rather than the net impacts of free trade. When you liberalise, there are gainers and losers. We reckon there are more gainers than losers, but the losers don't see where their jobs are coming. If I could actually answer what you did ask me, I think it is a paradox. How you've just got we have to turn it on our head, and we have to say, how is it possible that cutting spending makes the debt crisis worse? Well, the answer is that if you cut spending in the wrong ways too much, you reduce national income, and you can easily reduce national income by more than you're cutting your spending. So you end up with a rise in the deficit. The answer to the Germans is the opposite of this. And in my own personal opinion, the German government is faced with the choice. Do they want to, with certainty, spend vast amounts of money bailing out their banks when the government bonds that those banks are holding become worthless, not worth much less, because people don't know what they're worth? The market, as Mr. Gurria was saying, not in the session I've heard, but earlier, somebody has to move in and declare willingness to support the bond markets of Southern Europe. That will give some security and confidence, in which case the German government will save money. But we can refer to the work of Martin Wolf, Paul Krugman, Brad DeLong, Larry Summers, all of whom have shown that in a situation where you can borrow money at 2-3%, you can actually, and if you invest it, and perhaps what I should have, a point to follow on from last time, then in some sense is something, I mean, it sounds incredibly naive, but there is something resembling a magic bullet out there. The minister in the beginning of the session said, what about the policy, how can we compare, sort of, what's the balance between austerity on the one side to solve the long-run structural financial problems, which is absolutely necessary in the long run, and the need to sustain consumption to keep economic activity going? Well, the answer, the balance is, don't sustain spending by consumption, sustain it by investment. And if you sustain spending in the economy by public spending in investment, which yields a financial return to the public authorities, such as, for example, investment in insulation of public buildings, the financial, not just economic, but the financial payoff to that is very quick. So the answer is, I recommend to everybody the article in Foreign Affairs, the American review by Adam Tooze, who's about Germany's need for investment.
And so you were very polite about Europe, saying don't give up, don't give hope. But how does it look from Brazil? I mean, are we on a suicide mission here, cutting our austerity, trying to cut our deficits, depressing growth and getting into a horrible vicious spiral? How does that look from Brazil?
Actually, we look from a distance because the reality of Brazil is totally different. But we see that this austerity in Europe has brought major countries which integrate the European Union to a standby mode. I mean, who's going to take the first step towards, giving up itself to make sure that the entire European Union will be in a better position? So during this standby mode, I have seen my country doing the opposite way. I mean, yes, it increased domestic consumption by allowing a large amount of the population to start consuming, but it didn't stop there. I mean, the federal government of Brazil started triggering a series of investment policies to make sure that the government would be allowing the entrepreneurs to have a better business environment, to invest in infrastructure, which Brazil needs a lot, to invest in clean energy or in renewable source energy facilities, to send out of Brazil 100,000 students to take their masters and conduct research over, outside Brazil. I mean, so despite the austerity here in Europe, which again I say, to me as a person, it looks like a standby mode, pause. Brazil looked at its own agenda and made sure that we would be able to start a virtuous cycle, not just based on internal consumption, but also granting the infrastructure, which will be a key element for the competitiveness of Brazil in the global economy. So this is how I see it. I look forward that Europe will find its way because I was in 2006 when I was at the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency. I had an amazing discussion with my team there, and we were kind of anticipating that, we should put our export efforts to other parts of the world other than the United States and Europe. There must be something wrong ahead of us. We don't see what it is, but we have to make sure that Brazilian exporters will look at Latin America in a different way, will look at Africa in a different way, will look to the Middle East and to Asia from a different perspective. So this has helped us so far to minimize the impact of the standby mode that I saw in Europe during the crisis in 2008, 2009, and furthermore. So as long as I'm concerned, I believe that some measures have to be taken by European countries. They might be very sour at the beginning, but they will be those changes that will not be incremental, but they will be the turning point for a better future for Europe and for the global economy. Because honestly speaking, the world needs this market too. Let's not be naive here, saying that, well, if they're not purchasing anything, we are okay. Not at all. But we want to see Europe back to its track again so that, we will have less instability and we will be able to enjoy some good time together.
Thanks. Mark, you spoke about some of the other measures governments are taking, perhaps to increase productivity. Could you give us some examples of governments that are doing particularly well? And at the risk of sounding a bit cynical, does a large multinational really direct its investment that way, or is it just shifted to the country with the lowest tax rates and the least regulation?
Well, I mean, we're basically in the business to work with the organizations to help them do the transformation. So, I mean, I can speak from that perspective where there really are variances between some countries that are looking to take the opportunity to transform and move into new markets. We talk about Brazil. There's a number of organizations there that are completely transforming their organizations to move and to really aggressively go into the rest of Latin America. We see that less in many of the European countries of transforming and looking into some of the new markets. Again, it's back to my earlier comment around and the discussion that the panel had prior to us around moving that shift away from the gloom and doom and moving into getting excited, getting energized around the markets. But we are also seeing some countries that, as part of that transform, they may be doing austerity measures, but they're also looking at being more effective at the dollars that they do spend. This is one difference, that some organizations are being very aggressive on compliance, so doing a lot more with anti-fraud and compliance within the programs versus just taking kind of an across the board. I mean, the statistic is that within tax, within social benefits, typically there's 8 to 15% of non-compliance or fraud in the portfolio within a country, within most of the organizations and countries, being very, very aggressive on that first before cutting to the bone. The way that some governments are doing that is they're doing it in a very outcomes-based approach. So again, back to changing the way that things are procured. instead of viewing, let's say, tax modernization and spending $20 million on building a tax modernization system, they're strategically focusing on where they can increase revenues by the folks that are non-compliant, and doing that in a partnership so that they don't pay unless that result actually occurs. So really kind of, again, innovating or changing the way that they're procuring things in this area.
Out to the audience if there are some questions. I don't know where microphones are. We have a question here. Maybe you could introduce yourself.
Thank you very much.
Have we got another microphone? I think we got another one coming.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Amr Helmi. I'm the Assistant Foreign Minister of Egypt, and I'm glad to be here. Well, as we know that the world went through several centuries which were characterized by the rise of the West, rise of the Europe, and then the rise of the United States, and now we are witnessing the rise of the rest. I mean the BRICS, Russia, India, China, Brazil, and South Africa. And of course we have a big success story in Brazil, but we have a bigger success story in China. Not only a growth rate that they achieved between 9 and 11% during the last 30 years, they have the biggest experience in poverty eradication, they have the biggest foreign reserve currencies, they have also introduced as something called the state capitalism. This is a new Chinese model of capitalism. After we in the Middle East are seeing one crisis after the other, you know, the Asian financial crisis 1997, and then we have the international financial crisis in 2008, now we are witnessing the euro crisis. We don't know whether the euro will last or not. There are a lot of uncertainty around the European integration experience. How do you see the Chinese state capitalism, or do we as a whole need to look into the capitalist system itself to try to make it with more human face? Because as you are well aware that in 1991 we witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second major superpower vanished completely because the economic system was not up to the responsibility of the ambitions of the people.
Great.
Are we witnessing the same thing as regard capitalism, or are we have the imagination or the precautions how to develop the capitalist system in order to avoid these shocks that are affecting the world entirely? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. I think we got the point. Maybe Alejandro, would you like to start off on that? Is this the end of Western capitalism? Is it today done now?
I think the jury is still out. That it's an evolving situation. China has changed a great deal and will continue to change. I've heard voices inside China from the government to say they want to move to be a fully market economy, and the state should divest itself of many things and be more open to services, because that is a necessary but sufficient condition for them to continue to grow and to grow in an inclusive way. But I have no doubt that there's still a lot of state-owned enterprises in China. It does cause a tension with other countries in terms of the trade. Some believe that that means a certain degree of subsidization, etc. In the WTO, we still need to develop better rules to handle this phenomenon and to be a lot more transparent on this matter. Now, as I say, I think this is a changing situation. and China and elsewhere. And I have nothing against state capitalism otherwise, as long as it's efficient and it does not distort trade or investment. As
Definition, isn't it going to do that, state capitalism?
Sorry?
By definition, isn't it going to distort?
Sorry?
By definition, isn't state capitalism going to distort trade rules by subsidization?
No, not necessarily. It depends on the kind of regulation and the kind of openness of the economy, because then those enterprises will have to compete with others. So I don't think that one automatically state capitalism means more distortions or less. No.
Sergio, Brazil was mentioned. I remember your former president at one point pointed out that the crisis wasn't caused by people like him, like Lula. It was people with white skin and blue eyes, and I remember that comment because I have got blue eyes. Do you think we are putting too much faith in Brazil and the other BRICS to come to the rescue of Western capitalism, or is it now really your day?
Well, I have green eyes, and I didn't feel bad at all with that. I believe that, I do not bring that burden on to Brazil. I mean, the solution has to come from everyone. I mean, what I mentioned during my speech is that from every single country represented in this auditorium, we can bring good solutions or good ideas to be adapted to the context and to the reality of each country. I'm not being naive here. It's just a matter of opening a little bit your mind to understand that the traditional way of thinking and doing things may not be effective enough to bring the solutions to the complexity of the problems that the European Union faces right now. I mean, that's why I mentioned during my speech that the answer is not there yet. I mean, it has to be built. So I do not bring that burden onto Brazil that we are going to save the world. Not at all. I mean, we have our internal agendas as well. We have our things to deal with, to go through, and to improve Brazil. There's a lot of effort, for example, to remove the red tape, the bureaucracy, to help business being done in a better way in terms of speeding up the process. But we have to consider that it's not just a matter of removing what is already there. It has to be done carefully to also bring to the businesses and to the society the stability they need to feel comfortable to to make more investment. If it's done overnight and all of a sudden you say, well, how should I proceed from now? So in terms of Brazil being the savior, I don't see this at all. It's not our role. What I'm just saying is that we can be looked at as a country which has made some of the things that the previous panel has mentioned. I mean, to increase investment, to provide a better business environment, and to move forward, to bring fiscal stability, and to make sure that you will be able to maneuver through that. But definitely, the salvation is not in Brazil. But we can be part of the solution. That's what I'm saying.
And can I just ask Mark, how easy is it to invest in some of the BRIC countries that we're talking about, some of the state capitalists, that model? I mean, I read one survey, I think that Russia was rated 120th in the world for the ease of doing business. I don't think it was on your list, actually, but is Western capitalism really dead?
No, I mean, the investment, Russia is one of the more difficult countries to invest in. We just recently did a large investment in Brazil, a co-venture innovation project, again, with a company in Brazil to completely transform their operation. But even in Russia, Russia is one where, because of, like you mentioned, the index of difficulty, some of that relates to corruption, some of that relates to some of the compliance and transparency, but it still at least from an IBM perspective, more than 50% of our business is outside of the United States. So we are very focused on getting this right, and the BRIC countries as well as the MIST countries are ones that we definitely have to take advantage of from the standpoint of growth, as well as when our clients grow, then that's how IBM grows. So we have to work with the organizations that are facing some of the difficulties and come through the challenges, whether it's dealing with preparing for the World Cup in Brazil or some of the other challenges around the world. The growth is tied to solving those problems.
Did you want to come in briefly, or are you?
Yes, I just want to say that, well, first of all, to agree with something Alejandro said about the World Trade Organization not requiring everybody to have ultra-free markets and free trade. The World Trade Organization has rules, and different kinds of countries can adopt them in their own ways. But again, if we look at the growth of China, success has been very much tied to the expectation of success. I first visited China in 1989, and would talk to people about, did they mind that there are certain people beginning to get very, very rich? And they'd always say, well, it doesn't matter if we don't, our children or our grandchildren will. And the big danger for China, I'm not an expert on China at all, but I think the fear is if people don't see the growth in the future, then it's going to be much harder to make the social adjustments that China's making. I think both Western capitalism and Chinese capitalism have things to offer, and the implication is, and so does India. There is no single model that we all have to adopt. And certainly the rules of WTO don't require a single way of doing things.
Any questions from you, or gentlemen here?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jos Daum. I'm the Dutch ambassador. Until this round, thanks to the Egyptian minister, I was a bit puzzled. It was very difficult to get sort of an aggregate vision, an aggregate advice from the panel. But is it right that the future for countries like Slovenia is in globalization and truly participating in the world economy? And I asked that question because Professor Holmes was sort of advising against exporting more outside the Eurozone. Well, that is exactly, indeed, what we all do, and I don't see a negative effect on on the Euro's balances from that. But the problem is, it's very difficult. And Mr. Ramsey gave perfect examples of how you then indeed need to have stamina and ingenuity to really explore new markets and sometimes reinvent yourself as a company. Sometimes countries need to reinvent themselves and find new markets, not neglecting the old ones. So my question is, do countries like Slovenia, but we all, really have to profit from and invest in globalization? And how could we? I mean, Brazil is 200 million people, Slovenia is 2 million. It's a bit different.
It's an interesting question because Slovenia, I think, was seen as an example of a very successful transition, particularly in the respect that it kept a lot of its business in Slovene hands. So, Peter, was that what you were saying? Avoid globalization, look inwards?
I'm absolutely not saying we should avoid globalization. All I was saying was that it's impossible to suppose that Europe can create its jobs by assuming that other people will buy as much from us as the scale of the Chinese surplus. But I would also say that what we've learned from the last few years is that we have to be very careful of globalization strategies built on the assumption that the trade imbalances can continue. Trade is fine, but the degree of imbalances we've had in the past, where countries think that they can expand with running very large current account deficits and not worrying where they're going to go, so how long these can be sustained. I think people have to be a little bit more careful. And also, I'm thinking there's a caution that has to be made about the extent to which it's actually feasible to carry on with the degree of globalization. And secondly, I think I want to pick up on what Alejandro Jara said about the importance of supply chains. The existence of supply chains is a very powerful brake on protectionism. It's very important, and I think in East Asia it's been an extremely important feature in preventing a resurgence of protectionism. But the fact that your supply chains are stretched over a long area makes you vulnerable to the kind of thing which Mr. Hara is talking about. And there has to be a slight caution. The great thing about the European Union is that you don't have to, well, for the time being, and unless things go really, really badly wrong. And if I may just make one more historical point, I just had a holiday in the Socha Valley, the old Isonzo, as it was called. The frontier between Slovenia and Italy is now completely open. That's an achievement of the European Union, which it would be catastrophic for Slovenia to throw away. Slovenia can deal with businesses everywhere in Europe. All I'm saying is the caution is you can't assume that Brazil will buy all the products you want to sell, and you can't assume that protectionism won't come back, and you can't assume that global finance will make the kind of imbalances profitable. So absolutely go for globalization, but be aware that that globalized production chains and production trade methods that are based on the assumption of continuing imbalances, they have a danger which you need to be cautious about.
Alejandro, if I could ask you, I mean, for a small country like Slovenia, the answer to globalization surely is the European Union. Yet the European Union at the moment doesn't seem to have got its act together, certainly in its currency union. What would your advice from your global perspective be to a country like Slovenia? How can it succeed?
Well, I would say that for medium, small economies, there's particularly no option but to be very open, in this case with the European Union, which is already the case, but also with the rest of the world. And I think otherwise it would not work. Otherwise, they will lose, and they will not continue to grow and to create jobs, etc. So, in other words, there's no option but to be open for small and medium-sized economies.
I would like to address this issue very briefly. It's my belief that countries such as with the size as Slovenia, and I have been here 3 times already, and I can say dober dan, dobro jutro, hvala, improving my language skills. You have to consider to some degree international trade as a way of increasing, your GDP. You can even look at Europe as a domestic market, or you can look at the world as the market for your company. I had a meeting a month ago with some representatives from Goreni. Goreni, it's a very dynamic and leading-edge company from here from Slovenia. And they already said their operations in São Paulo, in the state of São Paulo, starting with a distribution unit. I mean, they are trying to understand how the market reacts to the entry of their product before they make a decision of going truly international, considering specifically Brazil. This is what we would like to see from companies from Slovenia, that they take one step at a time, so that once they have made the decision to go global, they are totally aware of the risks and the possibilities that are involved. And on the opposite hand, Brazil has a huge domestic market. And my challenge when I was at the trade promotion organization there was to make Brazilians start thinking about going international, because they have such a huge domestic market. And they say, I am struggling to meet the internal market demand. So if I have some extra time, I will go international. But fortunately, there are more companies thinking that they have to balance the revenues from the domestic market with revenues from the international trade.
I think we had a question from the lady over here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to talk.
All right, could you speak up and
I said thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to talk, because I think you did most of the talking for the audience. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. My name is Viola Onwulere. I'm the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And we're glad to be here. I just want to say that, having listened to all the discussions, that if we continue to believe that the world is a global village, like he said, it means actually, like some of the speakers have preferred, Europe cannot isolate itself from the global problems. And so in trying to solve the issues, they must also look at it globally. I guess that's why we're here. And instead of just looking at it as the problem of Europe. And in so doing, I think there are other areas. The emerging problems, global issues, must not be ignored. For instance, we've talked about keep your friends, like we say in Rotary, make new friends and keep the old. Imagine markets like in Africa. For instance, I come from a country that has a population of 167 million people. It's a huge market for any business. And so such areas should be, looked into by businesses in this part, in Europe and elsewhere. Another major issue I think we should not gloss over is the issue of security. Security has become a problem in recent times, and security suddenly, would have really affected businesses, economics, safety, of course, in all parts of the world, including Europe. If it happens at one place, it would have affected what is happening elsewhere. And we know that terrorism is fast acquiring an international character. And so in looking at issues affecting the global business world, the issue of security must also be addressed or analyzed to see what we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to tackle that one? Europe's got to engage in the global economy. It can maybe learn from other regions like Africa, which is one of the faster growing regions of the world at the moment. Perhaps Peter?
Yes, I mean, just a brief comment. I can't respond to everything. I was actually in Nigeria in March, in the headquarters of the ECOWAS Commission. And it does seem to me that, the European Union has done some really stupid things over many years. But if you, and I would just say again, go to the Socha Valley and look where the First World War took place, and look what it's like now, walk across to, you walk to Italy with no boundary. And it seems to me that this issue of the relationship between trade and security is extremely important. Slovenia knows that it can sell into the rest of Europe and buy from the rest of Europe with no worry. But even in ECOWAS, it's still very, firms have to get permits to get benefit from the duty-free status. But I think it's a struggle that everybody should really take seriously. And another place I visited recently was New Delhi, where it's extraordinary to see how India and Pakistan are just beginning to open up trade relations. We were running a seminar with Pakistani and Indian trade officials, and they were together. And the moment you get that kind of relationship going, but the trade ministries talk. I mean, in the WTO, the Pakistani and Indian trade officials are always talking in a very friendly way to each other. The more you can do to get them engaged in running the relationships between the partners, rather than the foreign ministries and the defence ministries, the more. I mean, trade has a very important part to play in security, I think.
Thank you. We're approaching the end, so if we could have very short questions, one down here. Perhaps we could have two or maximum three, and then I will ask the panel just to round up very quickly.
Thank you very much. I'm Eugenio Curi, I'm the ambassador of Argentina. We have gone through plenty of reshaping global order. If you remember, in the early 80s, there was a new international economic order. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, remember finishing the Cold War. By the late 90s, we also had that. Exactly. So we are reshaping all the time the order, which doesn't exist. What I fear nowadays is that not only within the European Union, but at a certain level, the developed countries lacks leadership and clear ideas. Basically, it's the defense of the welfare state, not looking for the next generation. Meanwhile, within the developing world, countries are developing strong blocs, not only the BRICS, some others, and that means we also want for another share of power, political power. And that's
Can
very
I ask you to
difficult.
hurry, because otherwise we're
Yes,
not going to get an answer to this.
I go to the point. This had looked to me, or listened to me, as a sort of more terrible technocratic discussion on the economic side, which is very important, and the trade side. But take China. China is the only country in the last 4 years, growing, which also has a military dimension, and it's developing every day. That has its implications. So my view is that Europe will keep on lagging and lagging, lagging, and disappear. It's a global partner and player on the economy, not on the politics, and that will have its cost.
We have one final question, but if you can keep it very, very brief, because we're right up against it. No? No? I thought we had one more there. So maybe on that note, not very positive note, I could ask the panelists just to sum up very briefly. Is it all over for Europe? Do we have the capacity to reinvent ourselves and see ourselves through the crisis? And actually, can the developing world help us to do that? Maybe start with Mark. We'll go in reverse order. Maybe Mark. But quickly if you can, because we've got...
Yes, certainly. I mean, my point would be innovate, transform, and focus aggressively on employees and constituents. Yes, Europe can survive and expand and grow. There are several countries within the EU that are beginning to do that through transformation and, like was mentioned by the panel, thinking of innovative ways to transform their country as well as the organizations within the country, similar to some of the statements made about Brazil.
Yes, I mean, I'd say yes. We have the possibility to still grow and expand. The wounds of the crisis, I would say, are self-inflicted if we revert to more forward-looking, growth-oriented policies. We can draw on the social solidarity which is needed, I think, to bring these things that Mark was proposing in. And you know, we mustn't think of relying on the rest of the world to help us out. We have to do it ourselves, and I think we can.
Sergio.
I have no doubt about that. You know, you have such a full knowledge of all the policies that are taking place all over the world, and you have had experience in the past. So I have no doubt that there is a way out. The question is, will the leadership take courage to make the changes take place the way they have to go, in the depth they need to be taken?
Final word, Alejandro.
Sergio said at the beginning this afternoon, Latin America learned the lessons of the 80s, Asia, of the crisis of the 90s. They've been not doing so badly. There's a slowdown impacted by the crisis of the rest of the world. But there is something to be said about the quality of the regulatory frameworks in Asia and Latin America. Now, contrast the United States and Canada, two highly integrated economies. The crisis began in the United States. I haven't heard anything about any trouble in the Canadian banks. The difference is the quality of the regulatory framework. There's a lot of cash out there in the economies, in the private hands, but people are not investing because they see uncertainties, they see too many risks. What Europe needs is to stabilize and to improve the regulatory framework. In essence, they need more Europe, not less. Okay? They need certainly more disciplines, at the regional level, to allow to create an environment where people will go and dig out from the pockets the money they've been accumulating and invest their way out of the crisis.
Okay, I think that's about as optimistic as we're allowed to be in Europe these days, and I think the the general consensus is the situation is serious, it is difficult, but it's not completely hopeless. I'd urge you to stay for our next panel, Europe and the Arab revolutions, and to say thank you very much to our 4 panelists for their contribution.